The Chernobyl disaster is one of the worst nuclear accidents in history. It occurred on April 26, 1986, at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the town of Pripyat, Ukraine, which was then part of the Soviet Union. The accident released large amounts of radioactive material into the environment, causing widespread contamination and long-term health effects for many people in the surrounding areas. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant was built in the 1970s and consisted of 4 RBMK-1000 reactors. The reactors were designed to provide electricity for the Soviet Union's growing economy, and they were considered safe and reliable. However, the RBMK reactor design had several inherent flaws that made them susceptible to accidents. One of the key design flaws was the lack of a containment structure around the reactor. A containment structure is a thick, reinforced concrete shell that surrounds the reactor and is designed to contain any radioactive materials that might be released in the event of an accident. The RBMK reactors did not have this feature, making them more vulnerable to catastrophic events. The disaster at Chernobyl began during a routine test of reactor number 4. The test was designed to simulate a power outage and test the reactor's ability to provide electricity to the cooling systems in the event of an emergency. The test was scheduled to take place on April 25, 1986, but it was postponed until the following day due to a power shortage. At 1:23 a.m. on April 26, the test began. The reactor's power output was reduced to 20%, and the control rods were partially inserted to slow down the reaction. However, a series of errors and malfunctions occurred, and the reactor's power output began to rise uncontrollably. The operators attempted to shut down the reactor, but the control rods became stuck, preventing them from inserting fully into the reactor. This caused a power surge, which led to a steam explosion that blew off the reactor's roof and released large amounts of radioactive material into the atmosphere. The explosion was followed by a fire, which burned for several days, and released even more radioactive material into the environment. The radioactive fallout from the accident was carried by the wind and spread over a large area, contaminating cities and towns in Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. The immediate aftermath of the disaster was chaotic. The plant's operators and emergency responders were quickly overwhelmed by the scale of the accident, and there was a lack of clear communication and coordination. The Soviet government initially tried to downplay the severity of the accident, but as the scale of the disaster became clear, they were forced to admit the truth. The nearby town of Pripyat was evacuated on April 27, 1986, one day after the explosion. The evacuation was chaotic, with residents given little warning or information about what was happening. Many people left their homes with only the clothes on their backs, not realizing that they would never be able to return. In the weeks and months following the disaster, a large-scale cleanup effort began. The Soviet government mobilized thousands of workers to help contain the contamination and clean up the affected areas. The cleanup effort was incredibly dangerous, as workers were exposed to high levels of radiation while working in contaminated areas. The long-term health effects of the Chernobyl disaster are still being studied, but it is clear that the accident had a significant impact on the health of people in the surrounding areas. The immediate effects of the radiation exposure included acute radiation sickness, which can cause nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea, as well as skin burns and hair loss. In the years following the disaster, there was an increase in the incidence of thyroid cancer, especially in children who were exposed to the radioactive iodine released by the reactor. Other long-term health effects of radiation. Like this video, please subscribe.